I'm speaking today about the second brain and about the connections between our minds and our bodies, which has been really central to my work for the last 10 years, but which has been of interest to me for even longer than that, even from early in my medical training. There are techniques that we can use to access some of those inner resources to help to improve both the way that we feel physically, our physical health, and our emotional and mental health. I've often been asked why I went into pediatric gastroenterology. And perhaps most often by other physicians, I'm asked why I went into pediatric gastroenterology, which is pretty much the least glamorous subspecialty that one might find. You wouldn't believe the sorts of photographs I get in my email that people want me to review and comment on for their children. But what I've always said, and without even realizing at the beginning how true it was, about the reason why I chose this field is because the GI tract has a lot of personality. And in fact, it really does. Each of the organs in the GI tract act just a little bit differently. It's a little quirky. It's really illogical. I'm never bored. But the GI tract also has personality in regards to the way that the digestive organs are always talking to each other. And the brain and the GI tract are always talking to each other, really lending itself to this phenomenon that we seem to lead so much of our emotional lives in our abdomen. And the GI tract, in fact, has its very own nervous system, which is called the enteric nervous system. And the enteric nervous system consists of nerve cells that form connections within different areas of the GI tract, also connections with the central nervous system, with the brain. There's about 200 to 600 million neurons in the enteric nervous system, which is a lot, although it's way fewer than in the brain, but they're organized extremely differently. But interestingly, they produce about 90% of the body's serotonin, which is a really important neurotransmitter and may be familiar to many people because of their, just because of the way that they're included even in the name of some of the common antidepressants, the SSRIs, the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which like Zoloft and Prozac, which are in very common use. And in fact, there's a whole subspecialty dedicated to the study of the second brain, which is the field called neurogastroenterology and motility. Little known, but a very active area of research and really important to many people's quality of life, as you can imagine. And the field of neurogastroenterology focuses a lot on this gut-brain axis, the connection between the GI tract and the brain, which is mediated in some ways by the microbiome, by the intestinal bacteria. So shifting attention for a moment to the central nervous system, I'd like to talk about the sympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our unconscious nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, that coordinates the fight or flight response. And many people are familiar with, and pretty much everybody has experienced the effect of the sympathetic nervous system, which typically when we're describing, the classic example is what you feel when you're being chased by a wild animal. And your body just automatically responds with a variety of mechanisms for self-preservation. Heart rate increases and blood flow starts to be redirected to the extremities so that you can run away faster. Pupils dilate so that you can see where it is you need to go. Senses are heightened, focus digestion shuts down temporarily because if you're being chased by a wild animal, then digesting your lunch is pretty low priority. And subjectively, what we experience is a feeling of fear, which is quite adaptive, because if we weren't afraid when a wild animal is chasing us and we said, oh, what a fascinating pattern of scales on that snake, or oh, what a pretty cat, we wouldn't, digesting our lunch is really low priority at that point. And besides wild animals, there's a lot of other things that can trigger our sympathetic nervous systems. Time pressures and deadlines and money troubles and loud noises in the environment and bad news and a global pandemic are all things that can trigger anxiety and the physical manifestations of anxiety of the fight or flight response, even though it might be at a lower level. And that is important because the fight or flight response was really developed as a intermittent, life-saving set of responses. Chronic sympathetic activation, on the other hand, leads to a whole suite of health problems, including things like high blood pressure, increased risk of heart attacks, insulin resistance, which is the precursor to type 2 diabetes, insomnia, inflammation throughout the body, and a variety of other health issues. And in regards to the GI tract specifically, it can change a very well-functioning, happy, and coordinated GI tract into one that is really not very happy at all. In regards to the GI tract, chronic sympathetic activation leads to slower transit of food and nutrients through the different portions of the GI tract. That in turn predisposes to overgrowth of bacteria in the intestine. And while the bacteria in our intestine are absolutely crucial, we've got billions of them, they're supposed to be there, we need them, when they're growing too exuberantly, or if they're growing too close to the stomach, as opposed to concentrating more in the colon, then they can cause some symptoms, in part because that's the thing in our GI tract that produces gas. The human intestine itself does not produce any gas. Everything that it generates, all that gas that's generated, is from our microbiome, from our bacteria. And when people are experiencing chronic sympathetic activation, what they become prone to is this phenomenon called visceral hypersensitivity, which is increased sensation from the internal organs. Increased sensation so that something that might be felt by most people as a small gas bubble, let's say, a small stimulus, to someone with visceral hypersensitivity feels like a much bigger deal. And normal digestive processes can start to be experienced as actually painful. And visceral hypersensitivity really underlies a lot of the chronic GI conditions, the chronic GI conditions that are painful, such as irritable bowel syndrome and dyspepsia, or discomfort after eating, and even lactose intolerance, which, although it's in some regards caused by an absence of the enzymes to digest lactose, is exacerbated or brought to light by the presence of visceral hypersensitivity. So what balances out the sympathetic nervous system is a conveniently named parasympathetic nervous system, which really creates the opposite set of responses. So while the sympathetic nervous system leads to the fight or flight response, the parasympathetic nervous system leads to what we call the rest and digest response, which is really how we're supposed to be most of the time. After the wild animal has finished chasing you and you're sitting around the campfire later telling the story while you're eating dinner with your extended family, when the all those activated systems start to come back to normal, your heart rate and your breathing slow down, your pupils come back to their normal size, your digestion resumes, and subjectively you have a feeling of calmness. And so the sympathetic nervous system, maybe you could compare it to being up on the top of a mountain. It may be really exciting to be up there and really stimulating, but you've got to be really careful about every place you put your feet. And the air might feel a little thin, and maybe you're feeling a little nervous. The parasympathetic nervous system is when you've come back down off the mountain. You've come down into the valley. You're on steady ground. Your breathing can slow down. Your shoulders can relax. You can feel calm, sitting, enjoying the sunshine, enjoying the breezes, back to the normal state of affairs. So just as the sympathetic activation can cause health problems, parasympathetic activation can lead to the opposite kind of situation, can help to decrease blood pressure, can decrease insulin resistance, and to tune down or turn off that visceral pain, that intestinal or organ-based pain. But really, what we're looking for is not so much a balance, an equal balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. What we're really looking for is to change from a sympathetic predominance to more of a parasympathetic predominance. Parasympathetic predominance is what we should be feeling most of the time. So, how do we achieve that? How do we achieve this parasympathetic activation? A lot of the wisdom traditions have created exercises, created techniques for achieving parasympathetic activation, and many people participate in them. Things like yoga and things like meditation. And breathing exercises, deep breathing itself can help to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. My personal favorites, hypnosis and guided imagery, are effective for parasympathetic activation. But even just regular things that you probably already do in your daily life, those things that make you feel calm, are probably already stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system. Even something just like petting a dog or a cat can bring those feelings of calm and contentment and restfulness that is the hallmark of parasympathetic activation. And interestingly, group singing is another way to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, even above and beyond the effects that are caused by deep breathing, which presumably one is doing while singing. Singing together with other people leads to a synchronization and an enhancement of parasympathetic activation, which we can measure by measuring variability in heart rate. Sort of counterintuitively, increased variability of your heart rate is reflective of increased parasympathetic activation. Because if you think about it, it's sort of allowing for a little bit of a more nimble response when you're not stressed and pressured and your heart is really hammering away. So group singing is an excellent way to stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system. And so in conclusion, stress and anxiety affect many aspects of our health. The GI tract, which is our second brain, is one of the most stress-sensitive organ systems. When we stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, it feels good and it's good for us. We can achieve these effects individually, and we can achieve these effects as a group, as a community. And emotional self-care is the same thing, really, as physical self-care. And with that, I will bring my presentation to a close.